Lori, Andy, thank you so much for being here today. It's a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
So I think a lot of our listeners have heard of PECS and used PECS either as clinicians or parents, myself included. But for those who haven't, can you give us an introduction of PECS and sort of how it came to be?
Sure. I'm a speech language pathologist. And over 30 years ago, I went to work in the Delaware Autism program, and Andy was the director of it. What was unique to me at that point in my career was doing only push in services. So I was in the classrooms, sometimes for a half a day to a full day, which was really, really eye opening for me to understand communication in the context of a classroom all
Yeah.
day. I was assigned a caseload primarily of preschool children and was surprised to find that I was working primarily with children who didn't talk. So I went back to all of my training and started thinking, well, okay, if they don't talk, I'll teach them to talk by imitating me. Well, what I found out right away is imitation's not easy for kids on the spectrum. So then I said, okay, if I can't get them to imitate sounds I'm making, let's try some alternative form of communication. So the first one I had tried, given that I had a history of working with children with hearing impairments, was sign language. And sign language was also difficult because of the fine motor skills. If I tried to physically guide the fine motor skills, I ran into problems. So the next thing I tried was picture-based communication, and I had a history of working with picture boards. So I made picture boards, put them in front of the learners, and tried to teach them to point to pictures on the picture board. Well,
Uh,
isolating an index finger for a 2 or a 3-year-old is difficult. And from their perspective, I think what was going on was, why am I doing this? She has that car I want. Why can't I get it?
I just want the car.
Yes. So I was first of all wondering, well, are these kids not discriminating between the pictures? Well, that's easy fix. He wants the car. I'll just cut up the pictures and only put the car and picture in front of him. He had a hard time picking it up.
Uh,
So I asked Andy to come in one day and watch what was going on and help me problem solve. Went through the whole history with him. And he said, well, can you help him pick it up? And I said, well, yes, I can help him pick it up, but then I want him to give it to me as a communication partner. And that's when Andy, the behavior analyst, the expert in teaching strategy, said, let's try me sitting behind him, helping him to put the picture into your hand so that you are solely his communication partner, not also the person helping him to give the picture. And that was essentially the beginning of the picture exchange communication system.
wow. So the start was really just this one particular client who couldn't give the car to get to ask for the car, to ask for the
Yeah, he
car.
couldn't point to it, so I taught him to give it to me. And what I really liked about that is I was separating the role of the communication partner and the helper.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. Andy, do you remember it the same way?
Well, I think sitting behind was a little bit more fortuitous than a clever idea on my part. I was just trying
Mhm.
to watch and stay out of the interaction. So I was watching a number of just failed attempts of a picture in front of him, and Lori was holding the cars, and clearly wanted the cars, but trying to get him to interact with a picture was the issue because he was focused on the cars. So I was sitting behind him watching. And again, the traditional methods then were all about pointing. But it was
Uh,
pretty clear that even when Lori was trying to guide him to point, his finger may have been doing the pointing, but his eyes certainly weren't because they were looking at the cars. So sitting behind him, I had a different perspective and, realizing he needed to interact with her. Really wasn't about the meaning of the picture so much as he had to do something to her. So from sitting behind him, we had isolated a single picture. I just reached from behind him to help to pick the card up, gave it to her. I tried to stop that, being providing some assistance as quickly as I could. And all of a sudden, he's just like, every time the card's in front of him, he's just giving it to her. And he was happy. He finally had somebody around who understood him.
Uh,
And I think what was also relevant was people said to me, "Why don't you just tell him, give me the card?" Well, this was a 2-year-old who wasn't great at following directions. And having I would try to demonstrate picking up the card. He wasn't a good imitator. So it was really helping him to give me the card by helping him pick up the picture. That's what made the difference for this guy. And he got lots of cars that first day.
yeah, absolutely. And that's how it started. Thank you for sharing that. I had never heard that before. I appreciate that insider information a little bit. It's nice to be able to peek into the history, so to speak. Can you share a little bit about how you would teach this system to a child or to somebody who's needing it?
Well, what we found was, again, this child picked up this little interaction very quickly. So we had other children entering the program. Uh, they didn't have speech, they didn't have sign, they didn't have any functional communication skills. But if you watched them, you saw very quickly there were things that they like. Now, the next child, he could care less about cars. He was a cookie guy. Okay, so he
Yeah.
used cookies, and the next one, he was into crayons and painting. So we had to be flexible right from the beginning, trying to figure out, what do you want? It's not about what I want. It's about figuring out, what does the child want, and then convincing them you're around nice people. What do nice people do? They give you the things you want. That's
Yeah.
what a nice person does without making you work too hard. So that's what we started to do. We would quickly get to know a child, get to know what the child liked, have pictures available. And the key was just having a single picture. You know, yes, we know kids have to eventually learn to discriminate, but that's a different skill. Learning what to do with the picture is not the same as picking out which picture I need right now. So that was
Mm,
the key to developing the steps, the phases in PECS, was separating those skills. One was interact with somebody. Okay, cool. Can you ask for something else besides cars? Can you ask for a ball that you like or the cup that you like? Uh, all the time trying to teach the kids you could get many different things. And by the way, from many different nice people before you learn to pick out which picture you need. So that was kind of the unique part of PECS, was separating those skills instead of trying to do this picture discrimination, add a person, and an object, and where does the picture go, and doing it all at once. Like if a child made a mistake, which one did he make a mistake on? He
right.
picked up the wrong picture or gave it to the wrong person, and that's where, if you will, you know, my view on behavior analysis was try to isolate what's going on so we could address it directly. What Lori started to do, student after student, was realize, oh, okay, we got this little language going. He seems to be asking for something. Can he ask across a room? Can he, how do we switch from asking to telling? You know, I want to, I want the pencil. It's very different than I see the pencil, but
Right.
how do we move in those directions? So that's what happened over months and months, was Lori starting to try to figure out what skills were needed. And me and the other behavior analysts, what are the best teaching strategies to get that done quickly? So it's this back and forth between us. It was not, I don't want anybody to think that, Lori and I sat in a room and said, hey, we need phase 2. What do you think should be in phase 2? That is not what happened. It's like the kids were teaching us,
Yeah.
these were good things to learn. And then we could replicate with another student. Yeah, he picked up that same order about different things with different people, but the language unit, if you will, was very similar. So that's how PECS got put together, was watching kids figuring out effective teaching strategies.
And I think what was career changing for me was starting to listen to Andy teach staff about analyzing the conditions surrounding a particular behavior. When I was taught as an undergraduate and a graduate student, you teach vocabulary. And that was the global
Mm,
goal. And the way we traditionally taught vocabulary was teaching children to either receptively identify a picture
okay.
or to name pictures. And it never occurred to me that there's variety in the outcomes for using a particular word. So cookie could mean I want the cookie, or cookie could mean I see a cookie. And for a lot of my really young learners, I want the cookie was much more powerful than saying I see the cookie.
We're talking about cookies, and I just want it to be known I'm a cookie guy, not a car guy. I don't know if anyone's keeping track, but I'm
Okay.
thinking about your second student, and
Well,
I mean,
then what we would start doing is teaching you how to get access to a very specific car, the color, the make, the model.
right. So I'm hearing this, and I'm hearing what sticks out to me the most in all of this is individualization, right?
Yes.
It's not just here's what it is. So can you tell us a little bit about the importance of individualization and why that is, what that means for the learner?
Well, a big part of, you know, the first step again is figuring out what do you want? What do you like? What do you enjoy? And understanding that changes. Different contexts, different situations, different times a day. Those motivational factors change. So we always have to be sensitive. We can't say, even to this first little boy, you're going to ask for a car 100 times today and like it too. Like it wouldn't make any sense,
Right.
and I'm sure you like cookies too, but if that was all that you had all day long,
Eventually I
you'd
get
be
tired of
pretty
cookies.
tired
Yeah.
of it. So we have to watch that. We also have to watch, you know, how kids interact with things. We would see some kids had a very nice, pincer grasp, could pick things up really easily. There were other kids that were going at from the side. They didn't have
Mm,
that nice thumb, you know, pointer finger control and stuff like that. So you might have to adopt the materials for that learner. Essentially, my firm belief is, I cannot teach a child unless I understand what the child's doing right now. I don't know where to go if I can't figure out what to do. So that takes careful observation, not me demanding things. It's me observing things. Once I start observing things, then I said, oh, okay, uh, let's see if we can, move that along a little.
So Laura, you started talking about, or maybe Andy started talking about it, and Laura, you got some of the credit here, or a big part of it, right? The piece from the exchange to how do we expand how do we expand the communication part, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that part?
Sure. A lot of this evolved with my combining my knowledge of typical language development with what Andy was teaching us, the background
Really?
on how to teach, how to generalize, and how to analyze what's happening before and after the behavior. So I started doing this with a variety of other children. And
Hmm.
when they learned how to pick up a picture and give it to me, my next thought was, well, what if I'm not sitting right in front of him with my
Hmm.
expectant look on my face? So that's when Andy taught us, well, let's teach him to, we call it travel. Travel, I'm going to go get my picture. I'm responsible for my pictures. I know where they are. I'm going to go get one. And I'm going to go find someone that I know will be able to provide me with something that I really like. So we called it distance training, distance
Right.
and persistence. The persistence is if I go to one person who doesn't really have what I want, they're going to say, I don't have it. I need to find the person who actually can give me access to what I want.
With that example, by the way, again, the tendency might be for a child to go to somebody who doesn't have it, and then that person says, "Oh, go to Bob. He has your toy." And so the very next time, who's that child going to? Well, they're not going to Bob. They're going to go back to you because you were so helpful. How do I teach the kid to, from the beginning, look at, oh, Bob has my toy, go straight to Bob?
Yeah.
So it was problem solving like that. Um, that we had to overcome to keep the kids as independent as possible and not relying upon everyone else solving all the little problems.
I eventually got to the point where it was, well, he likes a lot of things. I need to teach him the difference between all of these pictures.
Yeah.
And that's where Andy was key in teaching all of us who were then doing PECS how to do appropriate discrimination training, but in a meaningful context. So rather than just put in a bunch of pictures and say, touch apple, touch cookie, touch car, we taught them that when you want an apple, give me the apple picture. When you want a car, give me the car picture.
Hmm.
But I was still wanting to expand beyond. I mean, when children learn single words, there's a point in which they start combining words.
Yeah.
So we started teaching them to say, I want the car. I want the big car. I want the big blue car. And then we started teaching them things like, I see the car. I see the car driving. So what was nice was Andy was leading the teaching strategies, but the speech pathologists in the program, we were happy because we were expanding vocabulary. We were teaching both requesting and commenting. We were teaching how to ask a question, answer a question. So we were checking all of our boxes with the picture-based communication system.
Just to clarify, one day Lori comes into my office and says, I'm teaching the kids how to put together, I want ball. And so I created this thing that the kids could put the pictures on and they could still hand that off to me. We now call it a sentence strip. Lori invented the sentence strip. There was no such
So
thing
amazing.
before. But then it was, okay, so what's the best teaching strategy? How do we teach kids to go from handing over a single picture to putting two pictures on a sentence and still hand that over? And then once we saw that, Lori started to realize, well, now the kids are hanging around me a little bit more while I'm looking at the pictures. So we could teach the kids to point to the pictures while I'm talking. That led to a completely different strategy. What happens if we pause in the middle of that? I want. And that's only 4 seconds, folks. And you're irritated that I'm pausing for 4 seconds, but that's what it takes, 4 or 5 seconds. And just like us, some of the kids were a little bit like, well, just, cookie, give me the cookie.
Yeah.
And we started to get some speech. Now, not every kid does it. It doesn't make the kids speak, but, it gives them that opportunity. And then you can have your party when it happens. And if it doesn't happen, you move on. He still
Right.
used the pictures to get the item. Okay,
Right.
maybe it's not quite as exciting as speech and pictures. Okay, but he's successful. The kids don't fail when they use pictures. They simply get a little bit more if they're doing both.
It's so amazing. I mean, we're talking about this. I just want to pause for a second because we're talking about sentence strips as like, as if they've always been here and they've always been used. And I'm thinking about myself in my first classroom and how many of my students were using sentence strips. And at no point in that time did I expect that I would be having this moment. So just to pause and say thank you both.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
they found ancient sentence strips in caves now with
With
our
Velcro on to old clothes that we used to wear, too.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But I think also what's relevant is with the advent of speech generating devices and apps on tablets, they all have a message window, which is the same thing as a sentence strip.
I want to get there in just a second, Lori. I think that brings up a great point about technology, and we would be remiss if we didn't get to that. But before we do that, the thing I'm hearing a lot from the two of you is this collaboration really across functional individuals, right? Cross functions, if you will. And I'm just curious about your insight in the importance of having sort of a diverse team of not just a speech pathologist and a behavior analyst, but also the parent and whomever else may be there. Just curious your thoughts on that.
I think what was life-changing again for me was being in the classroom where I was watching the teaching staff. I got to sit in morning circle and teach communication during morning circle. I got to do it on the playground at recess and in the cafeteria. I worked with a lot of occupational therapists who helped me with kids who did not have great grasps. So they were having trouble picking up the picture or using a pointer when they needed something in particular. Um, the behavior analysts in the program, starting with Andy, really taught me a lot about it's not just that it's an undesirable behavior. First of all, who's defining undesirable? And if it's a dangerous behavior, here's ways we can change it that don't involve anything that's scary or unethical. So that kind of collaboration has, I think, really, really allowed me to become a better speech pathologist.
And I think, part of what I learned from working with speech pathologists is that, their knowledge of, the order and sequence and what to expect developmentally. I mean, for me, classic story is a behavior analyst finds out that, Billy's favorite item is a snake, and he's 2.5 years old. And so I'm going to teach him snake. And I go to a speech pathologist, and she's laughing at me and go, "What's so funny about that?" Like, he's not going to say it. It doesn't matter how motivating it is. That behavior's not in the repertoire, so you can't get it under imitative control. Oh, so I it has to go back and forth. We worked with teachers who would talk about, here's what's in the IP, here's what's the family want. These are very important skills.
Yeah.
How do I start introducing color and size and shape? Okay, so, it's not it's a list. It's observing a child living a life and having everyone observing that life going, oh, this is important. Oh, this is important. And that's where, the collaboration is, it's necessary. I cannot proceed by myself, and a speech pathologist shouldn't proceed alone. And
Right.
those are crucial lessons.
It made
And
me realize that in graduate school, I learned a whole lot about what to teach,
mm,
not very much about how to teach.
I'm writing that down. That's an interesting thought. No, I mean it's so true, right? I think it's so important. And the other thing that I'm hearing from each of you, and I'm curious your thoughts on this as well. One of the things that I always thought was important was making sure that the parents were involved, because having communication, and as an example, having communications with the speech pathologist is great, and being able to get your needs met there is fantastic. But if that's all you ever have, how hard for an individual to say, "Oh man, I really want a cookie, but I don't have this isn't the right place or time, or I don't have my system, or I don't have any way to get it, and now I'm frustrated." I'm just thinking of it from my perspective. If I could only use my voice in certain settings, that would be really
Yes.
frustrating. And so I think that's
Well,
an element to it.
my example is imagine as a parent, of a child attending a typical school, and the teacher says, "Oh, Andy's doing a great job of reading in school, but he won't be able to read at home."
Mm,
You just look at the teacher and go like, "What are you talking about?"
yeah,
You know, they're gonna,
that's not a life skill then.
well, like, what is that? It's a parlor trick, if you will. So for us, if we're going to teach PECS, well, of course it has to show up in all the environments. It's not, for us to do at school or in an office in the school. Things like those are interesting, but that's not the point. The point is, I'm teaching you communication skills. You're using it in all these environments with all the people you're interacting with. So yeah, the parents are, they're essential. They're not an ad. Oh yeah, let's get the parents involved. No, no, no. It's from the very beginning. It's like, oh, how do we get the parents involved?
And in the United States, with our system of individualized education programs or IEPs, we develop very, very behavior specific goals for all the steps within PECS, but we always wrote in generalization parameters. And one of those was this has to happen at home and in the community too,
Hmm.
and other parts of the school building. And that was what we considered critical to successful communication.
Yeah. You, I have so many questions, but my first, sorry, my next question is, you mentioned in the United States, you're doing this work, this PECS is used all over. It's not just here, right? So how, I'm curious, how is it different here in the United States school system versus elsewhere? And what are some of the, I don't know, compare and contrast for us a little bit?
Well, our first observation is the kids are the kids. Okay, sorry, the kids are the kids, and I'm sorry, the parents are the parents because the parents are
Absolutely.
stressed everywhere. So they're in different systems and different schools have different philosophies of what to do and how to do it and what they look like. And you take your shoes off when you go into the class. And there are a lot of different skills in different places, and to use chopsticks, to use forks, and so you have to do all that. But we also found out, that language is not the same. Sometimes syntax and structure, it's rather than I want cookie, it's more like cookie give me. And,
Interesting.
so wait a minute. So Seth's going this way and the picture's going So then we had to stop and think and talk about, so what's the teaching strategy? Is that a forward chain or a backward chain? And what's the right order and where does it go? So we would sit down. And our whole point is like, if you think about just in English, formally it's I want ball. But what a little kid's actually saying, it's probably more like want a ball. But we don't think want a ball is a word. So we write it down as I want ball.
Hey, we give them credit in speech pathology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we all do, that's what we're all saying, is that your expectation should be for what the newest speaker in your culture does. What's that phrase? So don't simply translate that our carrier phrase in English is I want. I need to know in your language, what is it that little kids say to attach to distinguish, at that want from see or feel or hear, or all those other things. What are those phrases? Because guess what? In every single culture, it changes as the kids get older.
But what I find fascinating too is, as we're teaching children to build sentence strips, in English, we use a forward chain. Several of the languages that are using PECS now, it's a backward chain. And that kind of specific teaching strategy and knowledge about it and celebration of it, I think that's very, very powerful in getting success.
Well, and I think that's the beauty of it, right? You can modify it to meet the need wherever the need is, whomever it is, whatever the want is, ball, cookie, any of the things, right? And you can make the adjustment to make it functional for that individual and their family and their immediate team, right?
Yep. Early on, we found, the reality is, economic factors influence how you teach, what materials you use. So for us, printing in color, 30 years ago, it wasn't a big deal. We were in countries where there were no color printers.
Yeah.
So staff would take black and white printed out things and get a crayon or an ink pen and draw it in. We went to school one day and, teacher drew this perfect miniature, Coca-Cola bottle. We were just like, wow, that's really stunning. So what we found was, like those material issues that we might think are barriers for us, they're not. So when we make pictures in this culture, boom, they go and do it. And the parents go do it. I mean, we were in environments, parents had communication books with hundreds of pictures, all, hand drawn, but they figured out how to protect them so they would last and not disintegrate, very quickly. And it wasn't a pain to them. It was so valuable that their child can now communicate that, it was a tiny little effort to support that communication skill.
Andy, I'm afraid to admit that at some point in my career, maybe in my earlier years, there was a time where the color printer didn't work. And so we printed in black and white and then cut it out and then colored it with a marker or crayon or whatever, and then laminated it so that it would last forever. And, you could always tell the beginning of the year PECS word versus the end of the year PECS word. One is held together with
But
duct tape and the other looks
that's
beautiful.
beautiful. That's beautiful because it means it's been used.
Yes.
And the secret to laminating is use 5 millimeter lamination thickness, not 3.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. We could have a whole separate podcast episode about laminating, Lori.
Yes. And
So
Velcro.
and Velcro, right? Yeah. So you mentioned this earlier, and I want to get to it. You mentioned technology, and PECS has been around for a while, and technology has changed during that time. How is the PECS system keeping up with technology?
So let me just make a little comment that Lori will elaborate on it. When we developed PECS, we were doing that in the mid-late 80s. First publications are coming out in the early 90s, and lots of other people start to have publications on PECS. There are over 400 publications on PECS from something like 70, 80 countries around the world. We
Wow.
cannot keep up with the literature. There were
Yeah.
70 in the last 2 years. So
Wow.
I can't even track them all.
Yeah.
But when we were developing this, there were electronic devices out there. They were $10,000. They were clunky as anything.
Oh,
They
the
weren't
big,
portable.
yeah.
But the technology existed because that technology did not develop in autism. It developed in other parts of AAC. And then people said, well, maybe kids with autism can start to use it. So the technology was there. And then guess what? The first modifications for kids with autism were published in the early 90s with replications starting to spread. So it fascinates me that people think, oh, because the iPad is new, it means the technology is new.
Yeah.
Like a device is different, but the idea that you can have an electronic communication system built in that, quote, would speak, that's been going on for over 40 years. And the publications are parallel. So, sorry, I have to admit, some people say, oh, PECS is old, you have to use new technology. If you look at the history, it co-developed. It
Yeah.
wasn't that we were the ones pulling the dinosaurs off of the hills and stuff. So
Right.
I think
Right.
I think what I'm seeing now, some of what I'm seeing now worries me. I'm seeing a one-size-fits-all approach in lots and lots of schools, so every student gets the same app on their iPad. And I'm also seeing the the premise that children should have access to all the vocabulary on the device from the very moment they start using it. And when I go back to how typical language development occurs, they start with a single word, and then they learn 2 words, and then they learn the difference between those 2 words. So when I see device abandonment, it's usually because the response effort is so high. And it's just, I can't get to the right picture, or there's only 2 pictures on the whole device that I want, and it's 17 button pushes to get there.
Yeah.
I think there are better teaching strategies that we could bring to teaching kids to use speech-generating devices. But what I say to a lot of people with the very young kids is, the research now supports that the majority of children under 4, Andy, 5, who use PECS with fidelity start talking.
Yep.
And they're not going to need any kind of alternative or augmentative communication. We don't have that same research base with speech-generating devices.
in terms of the size of that impact, okay, if you look at the research with STDs with young kids with autism, the repertoire sizes are very, very modest. And what's interesting is if you look at the most successful ones, they use the PECS protocol with a device. See, having a device or an app on a device doesn't guarantee the teaching technology is there. So the science is in the technology, but all of our learners need the science of teaching. You
Well,
can't separate the two.
if I'm using my phone to say I want a cookie and there's no one in the room to hear it, who am I communicating to? It
Right.
doesn't necessarily matter. It's not functional communication at that point, right?
And
Think-
what happens when your battery's dead?
Right.
Think about this as a parallel for a moment. I have a young child. He cannot read at all. So I want to teach him how to read. He doesn't know letters, doesn't know anything about how to read. And I put a keyboard in front of him. And I start trying to teach him how to read with a keyboard. Is there a reading specialist in the country that would say, that's a really good idea? Not one. Every single one of them say, oh, you need to teach them how to recognize the letters and respond to the letters. We call that visual discrimination. And then we'll put it on a keyboard. But I'm sorry, there are people that are putting the device loaded with pictures in front of a kid as if that were sufficient to teach them to discriminate pictures, to interact with pictures, understand the different functional use of the pictures. I'm kind of stunned.
But Richie, what has been powerful for me to watch is what I've learned from behavior analysis about you have to look at how difficult the behavior is, how many steps there are, the response effort. And I teach people to write a task analysis for how many button pushes to say cookie. And if it's more than 5 or 6, I see abandonment. And what that means with some of the more popular apps is there's going to have to be a lot of customization. And that then leads to more device abandonment because the teaching staff realistically don't have time to do that much customization. And sometimes it's the speech pathologist with a caseload of 50 in a school program who's supposed to be customizing 30 devices. It's just not possible. So what we're seeing is it's just, I tell people count the number of button pushes to say what this child wants the most and then figure out, can I simplify that any?
But part of that button push sequence, if you will, is the issue of categorical discrimination versus individual discrimination. No typically developing speaking child learns categories of food and animals before apple, fruit, horse, pig. You learn apple, fruit, horse, pig, and then you learn there are different categories. No one teaches animals and fruit. And by the way, an example of a fruit is an apple. But guess what? Kids who are given devices, that's essentially what they're asked to do. You want to find the apple picture? You have to go find the fruit page.
And once you're on the fruit page, you have to do different discriminations between, you go to food, then you go to fruit, then you go to,
Right. And then it's, depending on how many fruits there are, it's not on page 1. You got to get to page 2 or 3, right? Apple may be at the top, but it may not be.
It's another couple button pushes.
Apple.
Right. Yeah. It's so interesting. I learning more about the depth of the response effort on both sides, to your point, Lori, I think on both sides, right? The teacher or the speech pathologist and the learner and the student, right? There's got to be, there's response on both and there's effort for both. But if it's too much for either one, the system's just not going to work.
And I can completely understand in a public school setting, a speech pathologist has a caseload of 60, 70, and maybe 15 of those, and that's usually a lot more than that, are using speech-generated devices. There is no time to do that kind of customization.
Right.
But one of the things you talk about, we have to understand categories to use some of the more popular apps. What we start doing in the PECS protocol as children get more and more pictures is we add pages to the book, and I start categorizing those and putting picture labels. I put pictures. I will categorize each of the pages.
I love that you had an example within arm's reach, Lori. I love that.
I carry it everywhere I go.
It's great.
Not really.
Keep going.
But I will start categorizing. Here's your verb page. Here's your fruit page. And the front is, here's your most frequently used pictures. I'm going to let you ask for a break, ask for help, tell me stop, tell me go, and then some of your more powerful pictures. But we do start categorizing within the PECS book, and that helps categorization then with the speech generating device.
Part of that issue also is our early observation of kids progressing through PECS and acquiring speech. What we were seeing was that most of the kids who were acquiring speech, they had about 80 to 120 pictures in their book. That's still handleable. Now, while I say, as Lori said, most of the kids are acquiring speech, there are some kids who start on PECS who continue to grow picture vocabularies and do not acquire speech. We do not know why. We don't know why the ones who are speaking start to speak. We don't know why the ones who aren't. We really don't know. But observing that, Now you have a child, for example, who's more and more pictures going into a communication book without speech. Well, of course you have to start thinking about other systems now. Of course, an electronic system will be able to have a much, much, much larger vocabulary. But one of the things that we observed was, for us, pictures were in a communication book or a device as a function of the child's use of it. Just because the device has 3,000 pictures in it doesn't mean he has a vocabulary with 3,000 pictures.
I mean, they're using all 3,000. They could be using 5 of the 3,000.
Yes. I mean, again, my analogy to that, to the reading example before, you have a young child learning to read. He's very successful. He could read 80 to 100 pictures. You have him start carrying around the Webster dictionary just in case he's going to need a word. And I'm sorry, you're laughing, and so would everybody else. You would all think that's absurd. But I'm sorry, there are people making that argument. He should have access to 3,000 words, pictures.
Right.
And it's just like, where is that coming from?
Yeah. So I know that both of you have done a lot, and we appreciate our field is better for it. But what's next for you too? I know you're continuing to do new things and grow, right? What's next? Laura, you're laughing.
I'm laughing because we're getting old. We want to retire.
No, we don't want that yet.
No. To me, I want to do more of the same. I love traveling. Going to Russia and seeing a group of mothers who've been the sole providers of PECS training for their learners. They're the ones cutting out pictures at night. Traveling to the different countries to learn the different cultures and the different nuances of language so we can modify how we're doing PECS to make sure that we're honoring the differences in their language and their syntax skills.
A big part of what we want to create is, for us, if you will, PECS is a part of the solution. PECS is part of functional communication, which is part of a bigger process. We call it the pyramid. It's just a way of addressing all the things that a child will need to become reasonably independent, getting a job because somebody has to pay taxes, and being happy or miserable like the rest of us. And so we are concerned about how do we create those environments cross-culturally? How do we do it for kids in France and Poland and China and Japan? How do we get teachers to see, this is a long process. You're trying to take a child who's 2 or 3 now and is going to become an adult. PECS is part of the journey for some kids. It's not for other kids, but guess what? Functional communication sure is. How do we get people to see that asking for help and a break and, I need to get away from you. I need some quiet time. Stop talking. How do we get them to see that all these are essential for everybody, not because they have autism, but because they're human beings?
Right.
So that's what we're trying to do, is trying to cross-culturally see how people could create these, if you will, teaching from our side, but learning from the kids' side environments that are sustainable over time.
And one of my ending goals, though, is I want to have more and more. I want everyone to realize that communication doesn't happen in the speech room only or in the classroom only. It's something that happens from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed. So I can't just isolate one 30-minute segment to teach communication.
Yeah, it's not that. That's not it. Right.
Yeah, I'm saying touch red is not a good teaching strategy.
Yeah. Lori, Andy, this has been a treat for me. Thank you so much. Thank you for being so generous with your time. Thank you for the work
Our
that you're doing
pleasure.
and continue
Thank
to
you very
do.
much, Richie.
And we'll have to have you back as we hear more about your international projects. So interested.
Yeah, I would love to.